the first time I realized my own home was no longer safe. I was standing in my driveway watching a county inspector measure my fence like he was preparing to tear down a crime scene. The crazy part was, I wasn't being accused of building something illegal. I wasn't hiding a broken rule, and I wasn't refusing to cooperate. I was being threatened with losing the place my wife and I spent decades working for because someone in the neighborhood decided the color of my fence was unacceptable. My name is Daniel Whitaker. I'm 61 years old, and before this happened, I honestly believed that if you worked hard, followed the rules, and treated people with respect, you could live a quiet life. Turns out, I was wrong. Sometimes, all it takes is one person with a little authority and a lot of pride to turn your dream into a nightmare. For most of my adult life, I worked maintenance at a manufacturing plant outside Austin, Texas. It wasn't glamorous work, but I was proud of it. 35 years of early mornings, overnight repairs, broken machines, and weekends I spent covered in grease while other people were relaxing with their families. My wife Karen and I weren't the kind of people who chased luxury. We didn't buy expensive cars, we didn't take fancy vacations, and we definitely weren't trying to impress anyone. We had one goal: build a home where we could finally slow down. The kind of place where we could sit on the porch in the evening, drink coffee while the sun went down, and look around knowing every inch of it came from our own effort. After years of saving, we finally bought a half-acre property in a quiet community called Willow Ridge Estates. We spent almost 2 years building the house exactly the way we wanted. Nothing outrageous, nothing that screamed for attention. Just a comfortable Texas home with a big backyard, a small garden, and a wooden cedar fence surrounding the property. That fence was probably the simplest thing we built, but it meant the most to me. I painted it a color called Canyon Sand, a soft, warm beige that matched the stone around our house. It wasn't bright, it wasn't unusual, and honestly, most people probably wouldn't even notice it unless they were looking for something to complain about. My wife planted roses along one side of it. Our old golden retriever Charlie would lay underneath it during summer afternoons, and every evening I would sit outside and think, we finally made it. For almost a year, life was exactly what we wanted. Our neighbors waved when they drove by, people borrowed tools, kids rode bicycles through the streets, and nobody cared about a fence. Then everything changed when Allison Mercer became president of our HOA. Allison was 45 years old, a successful real estate consultant who had moved into Willow Ridge less than a year earlier. When she ran for HOA president, she stood in front of everyone and talked about protecting property values, improving appearances, and bringing a higher standard to the neighborhood. At first, I actually thought she sounded reasonable. I remember telling Karen, maybe she will bring some fresh ideas around here. I had no idea how wrong I was. Within her first month, Allison started sending violation letters all over the neighborhood. One neighbor got a notice because his mailbox was 2 inches different from the approved design. Another was told their flower pots were visually inconsistent. Someone else was warned because their driveway lights were too warm-colored. People laughed at first because it seemed ridiculous, but slowly that laughter disappeared. Everyone started feeling like they were walking on eggshells. Then one afternoon, I came home from work and found an official envelope sitting by my front door. I knew immediately something was wrong. HOA letters are funny like that. You can feel the problem before you even open them. I sat at the kitchen table, opened the envelope, and read the words that would eventually cost my family nearly everything. Violation notice. Exterior color noncompliance. Fence appearance does not meet current community standards. According to Section 8.4 of the Neighborhood Guidelines, your fence must be repainted within 30 days. I remember reading it twice because I honestly thought I misunderstood something. I walked outside, looked at my fence, then looked back at the paper. It was still the same fence I had built, the same fence everyone had seen for a year, the same fence nobody had complained about. The next morning, I called Allison. I tried to keep my voice calm because I didn't want this to become a fight. I said, Allison, I think there might be a mistake here. This fence was approved when we built the house. She responded in that polite, professional tone people use when they've already decided they're right. She said, Daniel, this isn't personal. We are improving the neighborhood. I told her, improving it by forcing someone to repaint something that was already approved? She paused for a moment and then said, standards change. Homeowners have responsibilities. That sentence stayed with me because it wasn't really about paint. It was about control. A few days later, Karen and I attended the HOA meeting. We brought pictures, documents, and every piece of information showing we had followed the rules. Allison sat at the front of the room with a folder in front of her like she was presenting a major investigation. She looked at my fence photos and said, "This community has a certain image to maintain." I looked around the room and noticed something strange. Nobody was looking at my fence. They were looking at Allison, because everyone knew what was really happening. I stood up and said, respectfully, "This isn't about a color. This is about whether homeowners can trust that the rules mean the same thing tomorrow as they did yesterday." Allison smiled slightly and replied, "Sometimes people who resist change are the ones holding communities back." That was the moment I realized this wasn't going away. She wasn't trying to solve a problem. She was trying to make an example out of someone. And unfortunately for me, I was the example she chose. 30 days passed, and I refused to repaint my fence because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. Then came the second letter. It was no longer a warning. It was a legal notice. The HOA was demanding that I repaint the fence, remove parts of it, cover legal expenses, and pay additional penalties. The amount they were claiming was already over $20,000. Karen sat at the table staring at the paperwork, and for the first time since we built our home, I saw fear in her eyes. She quietly said, "Daniel, can we really take our house over this?" I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to promise everything would be fine. But the truth was, I didn't know. And that uncertainty was the worst feeling I had ever experienced. Because suddenly the place that represented everything we had worked for didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like something we had to defend. The hardest part about a fight like this is that from the outside, people think it's simple. They look at the situation and say, "It's just a fence. Just repaint it and move on." And honestly, I wish it had been that easy. I wish I could have swallowed my pride, picked up a paintbrush, and forgotten the whole thing. But the problem wasn't the color anymore. The problem was knowing that if I gave in, I was admitting that someone could change the rules whenever they felt like it and punish people who questioned them. I had spent my entire life doing things the right way. At work, if a machine broke, I fixed it. If there was a safety procedure, I followed it. If I made a mistake, I owned it. But this was different. This wasn't about fixing something that was wrong. This was about being told something was wrong because one person wanted it to be. A few weeks after my second notice, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. I remember holding that envelope in my hand while standing in my driveway, looking at the house behind me. The same house where my wife and I had spent years planning every detail. The same place where we had celebrated holidays, watched storms roll across the Texas sky, and finally felt like we had a place of our own. I opened the letter and felt my stomach drop. The HOA was officially filing a lawsuit against me. They wanted the fence removed, the exterior colors changed, reimbursement for their legal costs, and they claimed that continued refusal could lead to a lien being placed against my property. The total amount they were demanding was now approaching $50,000. I walked inside and sat down at the kitchen table without saying a word. Karen immediately knew something was wrong. She looked at my face and asked, "Daniel, what happened?" I handed her the papers. She read them slowly, then looked up at me and said something I will never forget. "We spent our whole lives building this place. How can someone threaten to take it away because they don't like beige?" I didn't have an answer, because honestly, I was asking myself the same thing. The next few months became something I never imagined experiencing at this stage of my life. Lawyers, meetings, emails, paperwork, deadlines. My retirement plans disappeared one document at a time. The fishing trips I had planned with my brother got postponed. The small road trip Karen and I had dreamed about after I left work became something we couldn't afford to think about anymore. Every conversation in our house somehow came back to the same question: how far do we take this? Our attorney, Michael Reeves, was honest with us from the beginning. He wasn't trying to scare us, but he wasn't going to pretend it would be easy either. He looked through every document and said, "Daniel, you have a strong argument, but strong arguments cost money. The HOA has resources, and they are willing to spend them." He estimated the legal battle could cost well over $100,000 if it went all the way. Hearing that number felt like someone had knocked the air out of the room. $100,000. That was more than a year of my old salary. That was money we had saved for emergencies, for retirement, for the future. I remember driving home that night in silence. Karen was sitting beside me looking out the window. Finally, she said, "Maybe we should just paint it." I knew she wasn't saying it because she believed Allison was right. She was saying it because she was tired. She was scared. She wanted her home back. And honestly, a part of me understood, but another part of me kept thinking about what would happen next. If Allison could force us to change something that was already approved, what would stop her from doing it again? What would stop her from targeting someone else? So I made a decision. We were going to fight. Not because of a fence, because of what the fence represented. A few weeks later, we had a hearing with the HOA board. Allison arrived with her attorney carrying a thick binder. She had photographs, printed emails, neighborhood comparisons, and a presentation about maintaining architectural harmony. She looked prepared, almost excited. When it was my turn, I brought a folder too, but mine wasn't filled with arguments. It was filled with proof. I explained that when we built the house years earlier, we submitted every design detail, the colors, the materials, the landscaping plan. Everything had been reviewed. Everything had been approved. Allison listened quietly and then said, "Previous leadership may have made mistakes, but this board has the responsibility to correct them." That sentence bothered me more than anything else she had said, because hidden inside those words was the belief that she had the power to erase decisions she didn't personally agree with. I asked her, "So you're saying a homeowner can follow every rule, receive approval, build their home, and years later someone else can simply decide that approval no longer matters?" She didn't answer directly. She just said, "Communities evolve." That was when I realized we weren't arguing about paint. We were arguing about whether rules were protections or weapons. Then came the moment that changed everything. My daughter Emily, who worked as a paralegal for a law office in San Antonio, came over one weekend to help us organize our documents. She had always been the detail person in the family, the one who remembered birthdays, kept old receipts, and saved every piece of paperwork everyone else threw away. While looking through an old external hard drive, she found a folder from when we built the house. She called me from the office room and said, "Dad, I think I found something." I walked in expecting another old receipt or construction document. Instead, she turned the laptop around. There it was, an email chain from 12 years earlier. Before the foundation was even poured, before the fence was installed, it showed our original design submission to the HOA. Attached were pictures of the exact exterior colors we used: canyon sand fence, stone gray trim, cedar accents. And then Emily pointed to the final email. It was from the previous HOA president, Richard Holloway. The message was simple: approved as submitted, date stamped and signed. I just stared at the screen. After months of feeling like we were standing on unstable ground, suddenly we had something solid, proof that we weren't asking for forgiveness. We had already received permission. Our attorney immediately changed strategy. Instead of defending ourselves by saying we had done nothing wrong, we were now able to prove the HOA had ignored its own history. During the court hearing, Allison's attorney argued that neighborhood standards had changed and that previous approval should not limit the current board's authority. The judge, Elena Crawford, listened carefully and then asked a simple question. Was this approval legally valid when it was issued? The attorney paused. Then he answered, "Yes." The judge looked down at the documents and said, "Then the homeowner relied on that approval in good faith." Those words felt like the first moment in almost a year where someone outside our family actually understood what happened. The case was dismissed. Just like that. The lawsuit that had consumed our lives was over. But the story didn't end there. Because during the legal process, something else came out. Something that made the entire neighborhood go silent. While investigating HOA records, our attorney discovered that Allison herself had built a large backyard pavilion shortly after moving in. The problem? She never submitted the required approval paperwork. The same rule she used against everyone else was the rule she ignored herself. When we checked satellite images, the timeline became clear. The structure wasn't there before she purchased the property. It was added afterward. The woman who had spent months telling homeowners that rules were sacred had quietly decided they didn't apply to her. When the news spread, neighbors were furious. People who had stayed silent started sharing their own stories. The mailbox warnings, the landscaping complaints, the endless notices. Suddenly, everyone saw a pattern. Allison wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was creating a neighborhood where everyone was afraid to challenge her. We had every legal right to push back. We could have demanded the pavilion be removed. We could have pursued action against her leadership. We could have turned the entire situation around and made her experience the same pressure she had put on us. But after 18 months of stress, after spending nearly $200,000 fighting, Karen and I were exhausted. We didn't want revenge anymore. We wanted peace. And sometimes people don't understand that. They expect a perfect ending where the person who caused the pain loses everything. But real life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes winning simply means you get to keep what was yours all along. Today, when I sit on my back porch and look at that fence, I don't see a piece of wood painted canyon sand anymore. I see every late night, every argument, every moment when Karen and I wondered if we had made the wrong decision by standing our ground. That fence became a reminder that sometimes the biggest battles in life don't come from strangers. They come from people who live right next door, people who know exactly where you sleep, exactly what you worked for, and still decide that their opinion matters more than your peace. The funny thing is, nothing about that fence ever changed. The color is exactly the same. The boards are exactly the same. Charlie still lays underneath it on hot afternoons, and Karen still plants roses along the side of it every spring. The only thing that changed was us. Before all of this happened, I thought having a home meant owning a piece of land with your name on the paperwork. Now I understand that a home is something much deeper. It's the feeling that the place you built is yours, that the memories inside those walls can't be taken away by someone else's ego. After the lawsuit ended, life didn't magically go back to normal. People like to think that when you win in court, everything gets fixed overnight. The truth is, the paperwork might end, but the stress stays with you. For months afterward, Karen and I would still get nervous every time a letter showed up in the mailbox. A simple envelope could bring back that same feeling of uncertainty. We had spent so much time defending our home that we forgot how to enjoy it. So slowly, we started taking our lives back. We started having coffee outside again. We invited neighbors over. We laughed more. We stopped talking about Allison every day because we realized something important. We didn't want her to keep taking up space in our lives even after she lost the battle. A few months later, Allison eventually stepped down from the HOA board after more homeowners started questioning her decisions. I never celebrated it. I never threw a party. Honestly, I didn't even feel satisfied the way I thought I would. Because by then, I understood something I didn't understand before. A person can be wrong, and you can prove they are wrong. But that doesn't erase the damage that happened along the way. The money we lost was real. The time we lost was real. The stress Karen carried during those months was real. And that's the part people don't always see. They see the headline. They see someone winning. They don't see the nights when families sit at the kitchen table wondering what they're going to have to sacrifice next. Looking back, I still ask myself if I would make the same choice again. And the answer is yes. Not because I enjoyed fighting. I hated every second of it. I hated the noise, the legal noise, the tension with neighbors, and the feeling that my whole community had turned against me. But I also know that if I'd given in just because someone with authority demanded it, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if I should have stood up. Sometimes the hardest part about protecting something isn't winning. It's deciding that something is worth protecting in the first place. I know there are people who hear this story and say, Daniel, you should have just painted the fence. And maybe they are right from a practical point of view. Maybe avoiding the fight would have saved money. Maybe our lives would have been easier. But I think there's another question we need to ask. Every homeowner stays quiet because fighting is inconvenient. What happens when the rules stop being fair? What happens when approval doesn't mean anything anymore? What happens when one person's idea of perfection becomes more important than everyone else's right to live peacefully? That's where the real conversation begins. Because communities are supposed to be built on respect, not fear. Rules are supposed to create order, not give one person unlimited power. And neighbors are supposed to help each other, not look for reasons to tear each other down. My fence is still standing today, the same warm beige color that started the entire fight. And every time I look at it, I remember something my father told me when I was young. He said, a person doesn't show their character when life is easy. They show it when someone tries to take something from them. I didn't choose this battle. I didn't want this battle. But I learned a lot from it. I learned that ordinary people can be pushed further than they think. I learned that documents and facts matter. I learned that sometimes the quiet person in the room is the one who has been paying attention the whole time. And most importantly, I learned that home isn't just where you live. It's the place where you decide you belong. So now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with a situation where a rule was used against you unfairly? Have you ever felt like someone with a little power started making decisions that affected your life without understanding the people behind those decisions? Do you think I was right to fight for my fence? Or should I have walked away and saved the money? I know people will have different opinions, and that's exactly why I want to hear them. Share your story in the comments, because sometimes the best lessons don't come from winning a fight, they come from hearing how other people survived theirs.